My name is Sylvia Russell, 16 years old. I used to think that a house only stopped feeling like home when you moved out of it, but I learned early, painfully early, that sometimes a home can slip away from you while you're still living inside it. It started when I was about 12, when my mom was too sick to stand at the counter and cut fruit for my lunchbox. Cancer doesn't come into a family quietly. It tears through everything, stealing routines, comfort, and eventually people. When she couldn't pack my lunches anymore, I didn't mind. I was old enough to stack some bread toss, a few snacks into a bag, and pretend like it didn't matter. After she passed, it wasn't that things changed. It was that nothing changed at all. My dad didn't suddenly start packing lunches or asking if I needed help. He just assumed I had it handled. "You're old enough, Sylvia," he'd say, like that explained everything. Like maturity was some invisible backpack I was supposed to carry without complaint. I'd watch him move around the kitchen in the mornings, half awake, coffee in hand, his eyes far away as if looking at a world I wasn't part of. Breakfast was silent, functional, transactional. He never asked what I packed. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he didn't want to remember why I knew how. By 16, I was used to taking care of myself. School, part-time job, my own meals, my own routines. Independence wasn't a choice, it was the air I breathed. Then Sarah arrived. My dad remarried 2 years ago, and Sarah came with 3 kids trailing behind her like mismatched shadows. The 6-year-old twin boys and an 11-year-old daughter who stared at everything like she was judging it silently. When they moved in, I told myself I'd adapt. People do it all the time. Families get restructured, rebuilt, rearranged. But I hadn't counted on how quickly a house could feel overrun. In the beginning, I kept to my room, not because I disliked them, but because it was easier. There were more shoes by the front door, more yelling in the hallway, more toys to trip over. Fine, annoying, but manageable. They weren't my responsibility. At least that's what I thought. It was about a year ago when Sarah came into the kitchen while I was making my lunch and said, "Since you're already making one, could you make lunches for the kids too?" I honestly laughed. Not because I wanted to be rude, but because the question was so absurd. I thought she was joking. Her kids and I barely spoke. We weren't close, and I didn't see why anyone would expect me to take on the role of a built-in parent just because I knew how to spread peanut butter. But she wasn't joking. I told her no respectfully but firmly. She blinked surprised, like she'd bumped into a glass door she didn't know was there. "It would help out," she said stiffly. "We're a family now." Family. That word felt heavy in her mouth, like she didn't fully believe it either. I still said no. Later she went to my dad. Of course she did. And of course he did what he always does when conflict appears, folds like damp cardboard. "It wouldn't hurt to help out Sylvia," he murmured that evening. "Sarah's got a lot on her plate." I felt something tighten in my ribs. I make my own lunches. That's already more than what most 16-year-olds do. "You're part of the family now," he insisted. Since when I wanted to ask. Since the moment someone else filled the space Mom left. But I swallowed it. Some fights are pointless. I didn't budge, though. From there, the quiet war began. Every time I made my lunch, I'd feel Sarah's eyes on me, not directly, but hovering like a weight in the room. If I ignored her, the tension sharpened. She'd make comments under her breath too soft for my dad to hear. "Must be nice to worry only about yourself." Or, "Some people need to learn to be part of something bigger than themselves." I let it slide. At least I tried to. Then one morning, the twins shuffled in their hair, sticking up like little birds' nests. "Why don't you make our lunch?" one boy asked. "Mommy said you're good at it." My jaw tightened. "Ask your mom," I said gently. "She's in charge of your lunches, not me." That answer made everything worse. Sarah acted personally offended, as though refusing to pack lunches was the emotional equivalent of slamming a door in her face. She escalated subtly, then not so subtly. She'd leave the fridge door open, letting food spoil. She'd leave huge messes in the kitchen after cooking and refuse to clean them unless she knew I'd be walking in soon. She piled guilt like bricks, each comment a little heavier than the last. Still, I stood my ground. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I simply understood something she either couldn't or refused to see helping once wouldn't be helping. It would be signing a lifelong contract I never agreed to. And underneath it all, something else simmered. A sensation I couldn't name at first, like there was more to Sarah's insistence than chores or convenience. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me, her jaw clenched, her expression not angry, but wary. Like my independence bothered her. like it reminded her of something or someone she couldn't control. At night, lying awake in the dark, listening to the buzz of voices downstairs, I'd wonder if the real reason she pushed so hard wasn't because she needed help, but because she needed dominance, order, compliance. I didn't fit into the equation she wanted. One evening, 2 weeks after the original lunch request, I overheard her talking to Dad in the living room. Her voice was low, strained. "She doesn't even try," she said. "She shuts everyone out. How are we supposed to build a family if she won't do the smallest thing?" Dad sighed. "She's been through a lot. Give her time." "I've given her time," Sarah snapped. "She's independent to a fault, always has been. Kids shouldn't have to be that self-sufficient." That last line struck a strange chord in me. How would she know what I always was? She hadn't been there when Mom was too weak to get out of bed. She wasn't there when Dad stood in the kitchen staring at nothing, unable to speak. She wasn't there when I learned that asking for help only led to disappointment. But something else lingered in her tone, not anger, fear. As if my refusal to rely on her, to connect with her, threatened something she needed desperately. That was the first moment I wondered whether the fight was truly about sandwiches, or something deeper she wasn't saying out loud. By the time the conversation ended, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I gave in once, I would lose every boundary I had left. And in this house, a house that had already taken more from me than I could express my boundaries, were the only pieces of me that still belonged exclusively to me. I wasn't going to let anyone take them. Not again. The thing about tension is that it doesn't explode right away. It builds in layers, thin, quiet, almost invisible, until one day every room feels tight, every breath feels loud, every movement feels like it might set someone off. That's what my home became after the lunch conversation. A house where even opening the fridge felt like stepping onto a minefield. Sarah didn't confront me directly at first. Instead, she shifted into passive-aggressive mode, a place she seemed disturbingly comfortable in. If I walked into the kitchen while she was there, she'd fall silent in a way that wasn't silence at all, it was performance. Her shoulders stiffened, her sighs became louder, her movements sharper. She'd slam a cabinet door or run the water louder than necessary, tossing glances toward me, as if waiting for me to feel guilty. I didn't. Not at first, anyway. But guilt is tricky. Even when you know you haven't done anything wrong, being treated like a problem eventually makes you feel like one. One morning, I was spreading peanut butter on bread when she accidentally knocked over a carton of milk. It splattered across the counter and dripped onto the floor. She stared at it for a long second, then looked at me. "Oh, could you get that?" she asked, already turning away. "No," I said calmly. "You spilled it." Her jaw locked. "I'm running late." "So clean it up quickly," I replied, closing my sandwich. She wiped the counter aggressively, muttering something like "unbelievable" under her breath. I didn't bite. Engaging only fed her. But the twins, that was harder. One afternoon, they approached me again, this time whispering like they were afraid of being caught. "Mommy said you don't like us," one boy said, eyes wide. My chest tightened painfully. I never said that I told them. She shouldn't say things like that. "Then why won't you make our lunch?" the other twin asked. "Brother and sister help each other." I crouched down to their level. "You're not doing anything wrong. But I'm not your mom. It's her job to take care of your lunches, okay?" They nodded, but uncertainty lingered in their small, confused expressions. They were children, caught in crossfire. They didn't cause carrying messages they didn't understand. Sarah started escalating shortly after that. If I cooked something, she left the kitchen a mess for me to stumble upon later. Dirty pots stacked tall on the stove, peanut butter smeared on the counter, a whole drawer left open one corner, bent from being slammed before I walked in. Once she even left the fridge door cracked open intentionally, and by the next day, half the food inside had gone bad. Dad said nothing. He didn't notice or didn't want to notice. He'd walk into the kitchen, see Sarah stressed, see me quiet, and jump to whatever conclusion required the least effort. "You know, Sylvia," he said one night, scratching his head as if searching for the right words. "It wouldn't kill you to help out a little." I looked at him steadily. "I help myself. That's more than enough." He frowned, but not deeply, not enough to stand up for me. Just enough to avoid taking sides. His specialty. By then, Sarah had moved from subtle guilt trips to outright manipulation. She'd wait until Dad was in earshot before saying things like, "Some people don't appreciate being cared for," or "It's sad when a teenager refuses to lift a finger for her own family." Family. She used that word like a weapon, swinging it at me any chance she got. Once she cornered me when Dad wasn't home. "You know," she said, arms crossed, "your attitude is toxic. I'm trying so hard to make this family work, but you don't even try." "I didn't choose this family," I replied, voice steadier than I felt. No one chooses their family, she snapped. Exactly. Which is why you can't force me to play roles I never agreed to. Her nostrils flared. You think you're so mature, don't you? So independent. But independence without cooperation is selfish. I took a breath. Independence is what kept me alive when Mom was sick. Don't call it selfish. She blinked, thrown off for a moment, but instead of softening, she hardened. You still could try, she muttered, glaring at me in a way that felt personal, almost accusatory. After that conversation, the atmosphere inside the house thickened. You couldn't walk from one room to another without feeling the weight of someone's resentment. The kids seemed skittish, unsure of what version of their mother they'd encounter next. Dad looked perpetually tired, rubbing his eyes like he wanted to erase every problem instead of solving any of them. But the worst part, the part that started gnawing at me in quiet moments, was something new in Sarah's eyes. Not just anger, not just frustration. Fear. Something about my independence rattled her. Something about the way I refused to fold. It felt like I reminded her of someone. Someone who had disappointed her, or abandoned her, or broken something in her she was terrified to see break again. It made her attempts to control me fiercer, her guilt trip sharper, her anger quicker. Then came the first real fight. I was heating up leftovers when she walked in, arms crossed. You didn't make lunch for the kids again today, she said flatly. You never asked me to, I replied. You shouldn't need to be asked. You should want to help. I'm not their parent. That sentence, simple factual, made something snap in her. You're being selfish, she spat. You live in this house. Eat our food. I buy my own food, I interrupted. She faltered a moment, then doubled down. You breathe our air. Use our lights. Don't you dare act like you're not part of this household. Being part of a household doesn't mean becoming your replacement parent. Her face darkened with something almost like hatred, but underneath it, there was panic. She yelled, I didn't. I walked away. Later that night, I heard her crying to my dad downstairs. The words drifted up through the vents. She doesn't care about us. She doesn't care about me. I'm trying so hard. I can't do this alone. Dad murmured something, his tone gentle but tired. She's a teenager, Sarah. Give it time. She's not normal, Sarah hissed. She doesn't need anyone. She pushes everyone away. Her voice cracked on the last word. Pushes everyone away. That sentence hit me harder than the anger ever had, because she sounded broken. Like she wasn't just angry at me, she was terrified of what I represented. But even if I understood it, it didn't make the situation easier. If anything, it made the pressure worse. Sarah wasn't going to stop. Not because she needed lunches, but because she needed control, stability, security things she thought she could force out of me. And that's when I realized something. Sarah didn't just want help. She wanted obedience, compliance, proof that I belonged here on her terms. And I wasn't going to give it. That internal shift, small, quiet, unnoticed, was the spark that would eventually light everything on fire. But at the time, all I knew was this. Things were only getting started. And the next fight wouldn't be about lunches. It would be about dinner. Dinner was the moment everything shifted. Not suddenly, not with screaming or slammed doors, but with something quieter, an expectation. A demand. A weight Sarah tried to place on my shoulders as if she had the right to rearrange my spine however she pleased. It began on a day when the house was unusually silent, like it was holding its breath. I got home early from school and decided to cook something real for once: pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread, the works. It wasn't for anyone but myself. Cooking was one of the few things that made me feel grounded, like I had control over at least one corner of my life. While the sauce simmered, I leaned against the counter and let myself breathe. Just for a moment. Just long enough to forget the tension of the last few weeks. Then the front door opened. Kids' footsteps. Sarah's heels bags, dropping onto the floor, the whole routine I'd grown to dread. I kept stirring the sauce, pretending not to notice the way the house seemed to tighten the moment they entered it. Sarah walked into the kitchen, the twins trailing behind her. Her eyes flicked to the pans on the stove, then to my plate already set on the table. She didn't smile. You didn't make dinner for the kids, she asked, voice deceptively calm. I didn't sigh. I didn't glare. I didn't even turn fully toward her. No, I said. I made dinner for myself. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. They're hungry. You just walked in the door. I kept my tone level. They'll be okay for 5 minutes. That's not the point, Sylvia. You knew they'd need dinner. I finally turned to face her. And you knew you had kids before you came home. You didn't ask me to make anything. I shouldn't have to ask, she snapped. You live here. You see what needs to be done. I felt heat rising behind my sternum, not anger, but disbelief. Sarah, I'm not responsible for feeding your children. You're selfish, she hissed. There it was, her favorite word, the one she wielded like a blade meant to cut away my boundaries until I was shaped into what she wanted. Before I could answer, the twins stepped forward. Are we in trouble? One of them asked quietly. The question broke something in me. Not my resolve, but something softer. Something that realized how unfair all of this was to them. They were children collateral damage in a war they didn't start. No, I told them gently. You're not in trouble. But Sarah wasn't listening. She was glaring at me as if I'd personally kicked over the foundation of her family. You cooked a whole meal and didn't even think about anyone else, she said, her voice rising. That's disgusting. I bit back the urge to laugh, not because it was funny, but because the accusation sounded so absurd. Sarah, I said quietly, I'm allowed to cook for myself. Her face twisted, something vicious and unfiltered bursting through. You're not part of this family, she spat. You don't act like it. You don't want to be. And then she said it. You're worthless. The words slapped the air between us. The twins froze. The room went cold. For a heartbeat, I just stood there, my hand still holding the spoon I'd been stirring with. I didn't react, not externally. Inside, though, something in me retreated, closed, locked itself behind a door I swore she would never be allowed to open. I put the spoon down. I'm done with this conversation, I said, voice steady but hollow. Sarah wasn't. No, don't walk away from me. But I already was. I stepped past her, past the tense air, past the panic tightening her voice. I walked to my room, closed the door, and leaned against it as if it was the only barrier keeping the chaos from swallowing me whole. From downstairs, her yelling echoed through the vents, muffled but unmistakably furious. I didn't listen. I didn't respond. I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I let the silence protect me. The next morning, I came downstairs for breakfast. The air was stiff. Sarah sat at the table, arms crossed, face tight. Dad was across from her eyes, unfocused, like he'd been dragged into a storm and didn't know which way was up. Morning, I said out of habit. Sarah didn't return the greeting. Instead, she looked at me like she was assessing whether today was a better day to break me. Are you making dinner tonight? She asked flatly. I stared at her. No. You are going to make dinner for the kids tonight, she repeated, voice colder this time. You owe them that much. I don't owe anyone anything, I said calmly. Her chair scraped loudly as she stood. If you don't contribute, you don't eat anything we buy. I already buy my own food, I reminded her, grabbing my bag. You're not part of this family, she said again, sharper this time. Not if you refuse to help. I paused at the doorway, not because of what she said, but because I saw Dad look down instead of speaking up. Not a word, not a glance, just silence. And that hurt far more than anything Sarah had ever thrown at me. I walked out the door without another word. The following days blurred together, quiet, cold shoulders, stretched out silences, glances heavy with expectation. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I felt Sarah watching me, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to give in, waiting for any excuse to twist the narrative. Dad tried being neutral, but his neutrality wasn't neutral. It was surrender dressed up as peacekeeping. He wasn't choosing sides because choosing meant confronting the reality Sarah created, and he wasn't brave enough to do that. But the breaking point came on a Friday night. I walked into the kitchen with groceries. My groceries. I began unpacking them, silently. Placing things in the tiny corner of the fridge Sarah allowed me. Dad and Sarah were sitting at the table waiting. I felt it, the setup. We need to talk, Sarah said. What about? I asked without looking up. You're not contributing to this family, she said. You live here, you take up space, but you don't help. You don't make meals. You don't care about us. I faced her finally. I take care of myself completely. I buy my own food. I cook my own meals. I don't ask for anything from you. That's not contributing, she snapped. That's doing the bare minimum. Dad cleared his throat. She has a point. I stared at him, something cold settling deep in my chest. Does she? You live here, he said weakly. It wouldn't hurt to help out with the kids. They are not my responsibility, I replied. You both decided to start a new family. I didn't. Sarah leaned forward. We are your family. I didn't blink. No, you're people I live with. A deep, dangerous silence followed. It was the moment everything snapped, not loudly, not visibly, just internally. A quiet breaking point. Something inside me shifted, steadied, hardened. And that shift, it was the beginning of the bold dinner move I was finally ready to make. If you've ever walked into a room and instantly known you were the topic of conversation, you know the feeling that washed over me the next evening when I stepped through the front door. The house was too still. The kind of stillness that doesn't come naturally, but is arranged, set into place like a trap. My dad and Sarah were in the living room sitting side by side on the couch, not touching, not relaxed. Their posture was stiff, their expressions tense, rehearsed. The kids were nowhere in sight. The air felt staged. A setup! Sit down, Sylvia, my dad said. Not hey, not how was school, just a command. I stood in the doorway for a second, considering whether to humor them, whether I owed them even that much. But the silence stretched uncomfortable and expectant, so I sat down on the edge of the armchair posture straight, prepared. Sarah folded her hands. That alone told me I was about to hear a speech. We need to address your behavior, she began with a tone so controlled it was almost brittle. My eyebrow twitched upward. My behavior. Yes, she said firmly. The way you've been acting is unacceptable. You don't help. You don't cooperate. You don't participate in this family. There it was again. The word she loved to throw like a net over me family, as if she could rope me into place by saying it often enough. My dad cleared his throat. We've tried talking to you calmly, Sylvia, but you don't listen. Not agreeing isn't the same as not listening, I replied. Dad rubbed his temples, a gesture I'd seen more in the last month than in the last 5 years. Sarah is trying her best. She's overwhelmed. I kept my voice level. Being overwhelmed doesn't make me a third parent. Sarah leaned forward, eyes sharp. This isn't about being a parent. This is about being part of a household, a functioning household. We all contribute. I do contribute, I said. I take care of myself. That's not contributing, she snapped. That's isolating. I'm not isolating, I corrected. I'm protecting my boundaries. Sarah's lips tightened. Boundaries are one thing. Refusing to lift a finger for your siblings is something else. They are not my siblings, I said quietly. Dad winced. Sarah's eyes flashed. This attitude needs to change, she pressed on. We can't keep living in a house where you act like a guest. Guests are treated better than this, I said under my breath. What was that, she demanded. I didn't repeat it. Dad sighed again. Look, sweetheart. My stomach twisted. He hadn't called me sweetheart since before Mom got sick. The sudden tenderness felt strategic. I know this has been a lot, he continued. Change is hard, but Sarah is doing everything she can to make this family work, and you're not meeting her halfway. I looked at him for a long, steady moment. Dad, did you ever ask me what I needed to make this work? His eyes flickered, but only for a second. We're not talking about that right now, he said. Of course we weren't. My needs had always been optional, convenient to ignore, easy to overlook. Sarah inhaled slowly as if preparing for the final blow. We've decided on a solution, she said. Something to help you learn responsibility. My pulse slowed, not sped up. Slowed, a cold clarity settling in. You will make dinner for the family 3 nights a week, she said. Non-negotiable. My dad nodded as if the decision had been obvious. And if I refuse, I asked, voice soft. Then there will be consequences, Sarah said sharply. You don't get to live here for free. You don't get to eat our food or use our space without contributing. Use our space. The way she said it made something deep inside me recoil. I leaned back in the chair. I didn't realize this was your house. The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Dad shifted uncomfortably. It's our home now, Sarah said, lifting her chin. I'm the one who keeps it running. Now. Not always. Not originally. Not fundamentally. A thought pushed its way forward, quiet, undeniable, and sharper than anything they had said to me. They had moved into my home, and somehow twisted the narrative until I was the outsider in it. But instead of arguing, I simply nodded once. I hear you. Sarah blinked, thrown. You hear us? Yes, I said calmly, loud and clear. Dad looked relieved. Sarah softened, thinking she'd won something. But what she didn't see, what neither of them saw, was the shift happening inside me. Not anger, not defiance. Strategy. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like direction. Purpose. A plan beginning to form, quiet and sure. And the plan didn't start with yelling or fighting or slamming doors. It started with listening. It started with understanding that the playing field was already tilted, and if I wanted any chance of leveling it, I'd have to stop reacting and start observing. That night, as I lay in the dark listening to the faint sounds of Sarah cleaning the kitchen, a memory rose unbidden. Mom sitting at the table, pale and thin, but smiling as she watched me pack my lunch for school. You're strong, Sylvie, she'd said. But strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's knowing when someone is trying to take advantage of that strength. I hadn't understood it then. I understood it now. The next day I began watching, quietly, carefully. Sarah's routines, her tone, the way her voice softened when she talked to Dad, but sharpened when she talked to me. The way she hovered behind the kids at dinner, correcting them, guiding them, controlling every detail like she was afraid of letting something slip. And then one afternoon, I overheard something that wasn't meant for me. I'd come home early from school, walking softly, not expecting anyone to be in the living room. But I heard Sarah's voice low, strained. "I can't do this again," she said. "I can't have someone in this house who doesn't listen. I lived through that once already." My father murmured something indistinct. Sarah's voice cracked. "My ex-husband ignored everything I asked for. He did what he wanted. He shut me out. He made me feel invisible. I can't have that again. Not in my home. Not with her." A silence. Heavy. Dad's voice, "Sylvia isn't him." "No," she whispered. "But she's independent the same way he was. She doesn't need anyone. And I can't live with that again." The puzzle pieces snapped together. Her anger wasn't really about lunches, or dinners, or chores, or even me. It was about control, fear, old wounds she was trying to bandage by molding me into someone who wouldn't abandon her the way her ex had. But I wasn't her ex, and I wasn't going to be her emotional stand-in or her scapegoat. She wanted compliance. What she was going to get was clarity, because once you understand your opponent, you understand their weaknesses, their patterns, their blind spots. And Sarah had just revealed hers. That night as I lay awake, something solidified inside me. Something that wasn't anger or rebellion. Resolve. The next move wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be cruel. It would be precise. A bold dinner move that would make both Sarah and my dad finally see what they'd turned me into, not by choice, but by necessity. They wanted me to contribute. Fine. I would contribute something unforgettable. The night everything changed didn't announce itself with thunder or shouting. It arrived quietly, like most turning points do, softly enough that no one realized a fault line had opened beneath their feet until it was too late to step back. It was a Thursday. I came home later than usual, the sky already fading into dusk. The house was unusually calm, the lights dim, the air thick with expectation. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with sharp, deliberate movements. Dad sat at the table, pretending to read a newspaper he hadn't turned in 10 minutes. The kids were upstairs. I could hear the faint thump of footsteps, restless waiting. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment, watching them both. Watching the tension ripple through their shoulders. They expected something from me tonight. Maybe compliance. Maybe resistance. Maybe another argument that they could twist into proof that I was the problem. But I wasn't giving them any of those options. I spoke first. "I'll make dinner tonight." The knife in Sarah's hand paused mid-slice. Dad looked up, startled and relieved all at once. They exchanged a glance, one that said they believed they had finally broken me down. They thought this was surrender. It wasn't. "Okay," Sarah said slowly, stepping back from the counter. "Good. That's good." I didn't react. I rolled up my sleeves, washed my hands, and began preparing a meal, not just for myself, but for everyone. A full spread roasted chicken, a pot of buttery mashed potatoes, sautéed vegetables, warm rolls. The kind of dinner that smelled like comfort, like family, like the kind of life Sarah kept insisting we could have if I just tried harder. As the food cooked, the house filled with the kind of aroma that makes people drift toward the kitchen instinctively. Even the twins peeked down the stairs wide-eyed. Dad's posture softened. Sarah hovered behind me, suspicious but hopeful. When everything was ready, I set the table. 6 plates, 6 matching sets of silverware. A perfect meal, carefully arranged. But there was one more step, a final detail that mattered more than every dish combined. I brought out the small box I had kept hidden in my dresser drawer for almost 4 years, a wooden box, with a smooth lid and a small metal latch. My mother's handwriting was inside it, and something else. I placed the box at the center of the table. Sarah frowned. "What's that?" "You'll see," I said simply. We all sat. The family, if I could still use that word without choking on it, took their places at the table. Sarah at one end, Dad at the other, the kids between them and me across from the twins. No one spoke at first. The clatter of utensils began, but before anyone could start eating, I reached forward and opened the wooden box. The kitchen fell silent. Inside lay an envelope with my father's name written on it in Mom's handwriting. Soft loops and delicate strokes I hadn't seen matched by anyone since. Dad's face paled. "Sylvia, where did you get that?" "It was in Mom's nightstand," I said. "The hospice nurse gave it to me the day after she passed. She said Mom wanted me to have it." Sarah looked at Dad sharply, as if sensing that this was a door she hadn't known existed, one that didn't include her. I continued, voice calm but steady. "I never opened it. Not until this week." His eyes widened. "You opened it?" "Yes," I said, because I needed answers. The room tightened around my words. Everyone was still waiting, stunned. I pulled out the letter. Dad swallowed hard. Sylvia, maybe this isn't the time. It's exactly the time. My voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It didn't tremble. It simply was. I unfolded the paper carefully. Her handwriting filled the page, familiar and devastating. I'm not going to read the whole thing I told him, but there's a part you need to hear. I read aloud. Please don't forget to take care of Sylvia. She's stronger than she looks, but that doesn't mean she should do everything alone. Don't let her become invisible in her own home. She deserves to feel like she belongs, especially after I'm gone. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Dad's eyes glistened. His mouth hung open slightly, as if words were trying to form, but couldn't. The twins looked scared, glancing between the adults. Sarah's expression went rigid, caught between shock and something darker guilt. I folded the letter gently. Mom didn't ask me to take care of myself. She asked you to take care of me. Dad flinched. She didn't want me to be pushed aside, I continued. She didn't want me to become a live-in babysitter or a cook or a shadow. She wanted me to be seen. I looked directly at Sarah. Her eyes hardened, but underneath something cracked. I'm not your replacement for your ex-husband, I said quietly. I'm not here to fix whatever he broke, and I'm not here to be controlled or guilted into roles that aren't mine. Her face flushed. I wasn't. Yes, you were, I said simply. You're afraid of being left behind again. You're afraid of independence, but your fear doesn't get to dictate my life. Dad finally spoke, voice cracked. Sylvia, why didn't you tell me? I stared at him, and the weight of everything he hadn't seen hung in the space between us. I tried, I said. Every time I said no, every time I held a boundary, every time I told you they weren't my kids. I was asking you to see me. You just didn't. He dropped his gaze. I reached for the last thing in the box, a second envelope. Not from Mom, from her lawyer. I slid it toward him. Mom left specific instructions for the house. You never told me that. Dad's head snapped up, eyes wide with something close to fear. You know what it says, I whispered. This house was meant to be protected. For us. For me. Sarah stiffened. What is she talking about? Dad didn't answer. I read it, I said. All of it. Mom didn't want anyone to treat this place like it wasn't mine too. She trusted you to protect that. But instead you let Sarah make me feel like an intruder. Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came. This isn't about chores, I said. This is about belonging, and I'm done begging for it. I stood chair, scraping softly against the floor. Dinner's ready. Eat if you want. I'm going to my room. And then I delivered the final blow, not angrily, not cruelly, but with quiet certainty. This family won't work until you stop forcing me to earn a place I already have. I walked away without looking back. Behind me, the silence broke, whispers, confusion, a choked sob from Dad, a shaky breath from Sarah. The kids murmured anxiously. But none of that made me stop. In that moment, I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking toward myself.